We often hear about the Great Reset, but what is the real Great Reset that humanity needs to undergo? Now, the real Great Reset has nothing to do about what's happening in politics, what's happening through government, and around the world in an external manner. The real Great Reset requires us to fundamentally reset our mind. Now, what I mean by that is we're so saturated with information through narratives, politics in the world. People are engulfed with excessive noise and they think that this reality is just the way it is. Now, if we just go back 15 years when social media on smartphones wasn't a reality, the world was a lot less noisy. And so what's happened slowly over time, where people aren't conscious with what they're doing, they just easily fall for whatever the new technology is. People love AI nowadays and this and that. They don't want to think for themselves. I don't really understand this type of sheep-like behavior where, first of all, here's a smartphone. I'll just instantly get it. Don't question what it is. Here's AI. I'll just get it. Don't question what it's going to do to my intelligence. I don't understand that type of sheep behavior. I've always second-guessed, especially what big tech think is good for us, because look what you have now, right? You have big tech telling us actually how to think. They're not just giving us products, they're actually trying to retrain your mind in how you think. And so this is a complete disaster. And so people actually just think that this is just normal. Right? A lot of information is normal. Having an anxious mind is normal. We need to go through our own personal great reset. Now, what I see in the world today, right, and you will obviously see this as well, is when you go on social media, there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of anger, and it's all based on a person's subjective opinion that has been trained by the algorithm, right? Being trained by social media companies. And a lot of people don't even question that, right? Why do I think like this now? I didn't think like this 10 years ago, but why do I think like this now? And so recently there was a really famous person who passed away, and there was obviously a lot of support and well wishes for this person because they gave a lot of joy to people's lives. But then there was a lot of anger and hatred for this person because this individual said a derogatory term a long time ago. And these people who have been trained by social media have zero forgiveness. And unfortunately, what this does on a subtle level is when you particularly have a lot of hate and you slander a person who has died, and all they did was say a word. They didn't hurt anyone. They didn't harm anyone. They didn't kill anyone. Is you actually accumulate a lot of negative karma. And so this is what is happening from not being conscious of what new technology is doing to us, the information age, information saturation, what it's actually doing to us, and how it's changing your personality and your character, right? And so this is a complete disaster because people will do anything online to gain an upper hand. They'll play the victim, which is a surefire way to sense that someone has a weak character and no strength of spirit. And so that didn't exist not so long ago, right? But now we can play the victim with anything. So, it's really ridiculous. But it's up to us to be cognizant of this. Don't just go for the new phone. Oh, AI's out now. Let's go for all the AI stuff. Oh, I want to let AI do my grammar. Why don't you do your own grammar? Is your mind that pathetic that you can't do grammar? Of course you can. We all can. We can all learn grammar and we can understand the nuances of language. Why would we want to outsource that to a robot? This continual outsourcing is going to get us to a stage where we are just going to be consumers of what is on technology, right? That's all we're going to be. Going to be sitting on the couch, plugged in here, eating our Cheetos, and that's all we're going to do. A complete disaster. And this is where we're going. We're going to a stage of collective idiocracy. And so we need to retract that. Particularly for spiritual aspirants, we need to go through our own personal great reset. You essentially have to un-F your mind, right? Most people's mind is completely effed, right? It really is. And so we have to be cognizant of all of this externality trying to infiltrate our soul, trying to retrain how we think, trying to train our behavior, and so forth and so on. Throw the phone away. Stop listening to divisive political narratives. Stop listening to tech companies trying to divide people by race and religion and so forth. Throw it away. Throw it all away. You don't need it. You never have needed it. And a lot of people will say, well, I'm watching you now, Jason, through the phone. But you can watch me on the computer in your spare time. I don't need to have your attention immediately, right? And so we have to really question and stop defending tech companies and social media companies and the phone. It's like defending the toaster, right? I mentioned in my book, Spiritual Freedom in the Digital Age, about, defending social media and phones is similar to defending the toaster. And so you don't defend your toaster, right? If I said, toasters are useless, you would not defend it. I mean, it's kind of silly, right, to defend. But we, for some reason, defend our phones, defend social media, because we have this, or we believe we have this intimate relationship with it. But it's a toxic relationship. It's using you, right? I can't believe the amount of times people pick up their phone and play with their phone every day. It's a disaster. It really is. You can't cultivate stillness of mind, presence of behavior and character if you're always fidgeting like a child. You cannot do that. You're fidgeting like a child. I see people at restaurants and that where they're in conversation with someone, but someone's got their phone. I see, yeah. They're not listening at all. If I was in that conversation, I instantly walk out, because what's the point? What is the point, right? This communication is natural and real, right? Human to human, right? Rather than having some sort of source of distraction that's there in a type of communication. We have to get rid of the phone, particularly when we're having communications with people, right? It's rude to have a phone present when you're in conversation with someone else. And so you have to stop this information saturation. That's what it is, right? There's all of this information coming in and you are downloading it on a subtle level. But think about this. Why are you taking in all of this different information if it doesn't really relate to you, right? So you've got gossip magazines. There's a lot of gossip on social media and this and that. And people will know something about celebrities, for example, but what does that actually do to your life, right? If you are invested in pottery, why does it matter what's happening in a celebrity's life? Wouldn't it be more healthy if you were reading a book about pottery, or maybe then you were consuming information about something that actually relates to your own personal interests? But what we've got in the world is we've got all this surface noise, this unnecessary noise that keeps infiltrating our eyes and ears, and people think that this is completely natural. And this is part of the reason why I wrote my book, Fasting the Mind, right? Because I looked out in the world and with no smartphone, I'm thinking, what is so interesting in the smartphone all the time? Can't you just check social media when you go home and so forth and so on? And then communication will be much more present, right? Because when I look at WhatsApp and all of these other platforms, the communication is not present. It's just like chit chat. Back and forth, where if you write an email at length, you can send that and you will actually have a lot of things to say, but you don't have a back and forth banter on the email, so to speak, right? And so we need to un-F our mind from this information saturation. Now, why this is important is when we look at two of the core practices within spirituality, you've got shamatha, which is tranquility, right? And you've got vipassana, which is insight. And so you can never get to vipassana, the insight of your true nature, without shamatha, right? You need to have shamatha, tranquility. And that cannot happen if you're always on the phone and you're absorbed with information. Now, what we need to cultivate shamatha is to have our own personal great reset. Stop the noise infiltrating your senses, right? Now, this reminds me of one of the most important yogas within Advaita Vedanta, which is Asparsha Yoga. Now, Asparsha Yoga technically is the yoga of no touch. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not touching the skin or touching somebody else. It means not allowing your mind to touch external phenomena, which includes information, includes narratives, politics, includes whatever nonsense is on the social media feed. The withdrawal of the senses, what is known in yogic philosophy as pratyahara, right? You need pratyahara to apply asparsha yoga, right? So you need to practice asparsha yoga, the yoga of no touch. Oh, look at all this news over here. Don't allow your mind to touch that. Withdraw it. Because why is it important, right? What I've seen, especially since the age of large-scale media, going back to the advent of the television, is there's been certain events throughout the course of the last 80 years, so to speak, which are designed to attract your attention and to make that moment somehow about yourself, even though you have no relation to whatever that event may be. And these are big events because the media networks inflate them. And then what you see is this type of mass psychosis, this mass formation psychosis, where people become absorbed in whatever that event is. And then the media networks and the social media networks in this day and age have control of you. COVID is a good example, right? Was a psyop in some sense to see how we can have mass formation psychosis, where people are controlled by narratives and information and so forth and so on. Even if you don't agree with what I'm saying, you're not agreeing based on whatever information and that you had throughout that time, right? And so that's a type of social training, a type of indoctrination where you should have been practicing asparsha yoga and not allowing your mind to touch whatever information is out there and just abide as the self, as the undifferentiated Atman, right? That undifferentiated state of consciousness that you are. And that is what the Great Reset is. You're not allowing any of this information trying to infiltrate you, trying to train you, trying to indoctrinate you to become a disfigured version of yourself, right? And that's what happened, particularly through COVID. A lot of people became this disfigured version of who they are. And then you had all of this arguing and hatred all over the world because of this. And all I see is mass indoctrination, right? And so as a spiritual aspirant, you have to be cognizant of this mass indoctrination. You have to be. Because otherwise your soul will be trampled upon due to whatever the social media companies or the media networks think is fit for you. But you are like a Abhaya Mudra, complete fearlessness, because you are the Atman. You don't need to know this information. You don't need to know that. I don't need to ascribe to what you're telling me to do, right? And so this is how you keep your spirit clean and how you begin to go through the process of the real great reset. You need to reset your mind so that you can see the world as it truly is. You need to stop listening to narratives, to politics, to this and that. You have to completely reset your mind, and then you can forge your own path based on your true self and not based on this warped version of yourself, right? And so you have to cultivate shamatha, that tranquility. And the way to do that is through asparsha yoga, is through the yoga of no touch. Hey, look at this news. Look, this massive news over here. I don't need to see it. I really don't need to see it, right? And so a good example of this was in 2024, was all year when I was traveling, and I would be with Americans from all over the world, and we're like in exotic locations and this and that, and they're looking at their phone, looking at what's happening with the election. A complete disaster. You're at one of the grandest spiritual locations in the world, and the topic of conversation is what's happening thousands of miles away, right? And so this is mass indoctrination, right? Here is this information, this food that we want to serve to you, this informational food, right? That we want you to consume through your eyes and ears, and this is going to transform you, right? Based on your own subjective view of the world. And that subjective view of the world is the problem, because you've been trained and indoctrinated to such an extent that you think in a certain political way, you think in a certain religious way or social way and this and that, but all along the way, you've had this socialization process infecting your soul, right? And the way to cleanse that soul is asparsha yoga, the yoga of no touch. The yoga of no touch. Even you'll see conflict, right? You'll see something happen in the world and you'll see that inner chatter in your mind go, oh, I don't agree with that and this and that. But then you have to say, actually, why don't I agree with that, right? Why don't I agree with that? Because it's not like the end of the world, what's happening in this news bulletin. But for some reason, I'm acting like it's the end of the world. And this is what happens on social media. People think that all of this news is the end of the world, and they get in the comments section and this and that. And then people just don't even care about real things, like how 25 to 30,000 people die each day of starvation. But apparently, what's happening on CNN with news that doesn't even relate to you in a lot of sense is more important than 25 to 30,000 people a day dying of starvation, which is completely ridiculous, right? When you peel the curtain back. And so that's why you have to go through that great reset, because once you go through that, then you'll be able to see the world as it truly is through a clear mind, right? Your mind will be completely tranquil. And a good representation of shamatha, right, is that the lake is completely still. Now, when the lake is completely still, right, there's no turbulence in the lake. The turbulence is the noise of the world, right? Throwing rocks into the lake that makes the ripples, and you can't see the nature of the lake. But when you have a completely still mind, you can look into the lake and see the foundation of the lake, right? You can see right into its nature. And that is vipassana. That is the insight into your true nature. But it can't happen unless your mind is completely tranquil and still. And so that's where Sparsha Yoga comes in, which then facilitates the Great Reset. And so I wanted to speak to you about that today, because when I look out into the world, I see a lot of hatred and anger and this and that, and all I see are indoctrinated people fighting with indoctrinated people who have just a lot of hate and this and that, because they've been trained by social media and media networks to be a certain way, to be in opposition with others, and it's just one big circus. And now, if you want to realize that it's a circus, you have to wake up to that fact and then go through the process of the Great Reset. Because naturally, you are good. You are loving. You actually don't like to fight with others. You would rather peace and harmony. But the way, particularly younger generations, are trained in this day and age because of social media and media networks, is they would prefer to be fighting, right? Because they have a personal view that they're trying to support that was cultivated through education and through ignorant teachers and through ignorant university institutions that cultivate this type of hate in their heart, which justifies their activism, which justifies their personal views. And so they really don't want peace and harmony. So their soul needs to be completely cleansed. Otherwise, they're going to continue to accrue a lot of negative karma throughout their life. And so this is especially important for younger people to go through this true great reset, right? And so once we do that, then we will realize that in our hearts, we're fundamentally good. In our hearts, we're fundamentally loving. And in our hearts, we fundamentally yearn for peace. Shanti, shanti, shanti.